Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. Chapter 27. Excitement over Thupkuja. I carry him to the court of King Godlidas. His instant affection for Princess Schneebol. I am accused of exercising the black art. My defense and my reward. Anxiety of the Kultiquirps, lest Thupkuja perish of hunger. This calamity averted. Another stares us in the face. How to keep him from freezing to death. I solve the problem, but draw upon me a strange misfortune. It all turned out just as I had thought it would. The moment it became known that the little man with the frozen smile had actually come to life, the wildest excitement prevailed in every part of the icy domain of his frigid majesty. I was astounded at the change in the actions of the Kultiquirps. They moved more quickly, they talked faster, they made more gestures than I had ever seen them do before. In some cases, you will hardly believe it, dear friends, I actually noticed a faint glow in the cold cheeks of a few of them. I'd hoped to be able to bundle Thupkuja up warmly and make my escape to the ice palace before the people learned of his coming to life, but in vain. When I made my appearance at the door, there was a large crowd of Kultiquirps pushing and pulling in front of my quarters. Most of them were good-natured and cried out, "Show him to us, little Baron. Show us the little man with the frozen smile, whom thou hast brought to life. Let us look upon his face." "Nay, nay, Kultiquirps," I exclaimed. "It must not be. His frigid majesty must be the first to look upon Thupkuja's face. Room, room for the noble guest of the royal Godlidas. In the name of his frigid majesty, give way, and let me pass." The Kultiquirps showed no inclination to obey. To such a pitch of excitement had they worked themselves up, that only upon seeing Bulger advance upon them with flashing eye and teeth laid bare, did they reach the conclusion that my brave companion was in no mood to be trifled with. Thwarted in their wild desire to get a peep at Thupkuja, the Kultiquirps now began to rail at me as I passed them by on my way to the ice palace. "Oh, master magician! Ha ha! Prince of the black art! Boo boo, little wizard! Have a care, wily necromancer! See to it that thou dost not practice any of thy tricks of enchantment upon us." I was glad when the axe-bearer saw my plight and hurried forward to extricate me from the crowd of angry people. King Godlidas met me at the portal of his icy palace, and at his heels came Princess Schneebol, who could hardly wait for her turn to take a look at the curious living creature, which I unwrapped just enough to let her see its nose. The instant Thupkuja set eyes upon the sweet face of the Kultiquirpian princess, he stretched out his little arm as a child might to its mother. The sudden show of affection caused Schneebol the liveliest pleasure, and quickly drawing off one of her gloves, she reached out and stroked the animal's head. But at the touch of those, to him, icy little fingers, he uttered a low wail and drew back underneath the warm pelt in which he was snugly wrapped. Poor Schneebol! She gave a sigh as she saw him do this, but it didn't prevent her from coming every minute or so and lifting one end of the pelt just enough to take another look at Thupkuja, who, while he never failed to cuddle up closer to me at the sight of the princess, yet invariably thrust out one of his black paws from under the pelt for Schneebel to shake. While seated on the divan nearest the throne, I observed that Frosteifies and Glacier Boy were holding a whispered conference with his frigid majesty. At once I guessed the subject of their conversation. Rising to my feet, I made a sign that I wished to address the king, and when he had nodded his head with stern and icy dignity, I began to speak. You know, dear friends, how eloquent I can be when the mood is upon me. While standing there, almost upon the steps of King Gelidus' throne of ice, I proceeded to defend myself against the charge of being a master of the black art. I will not tell you all I said, but this was my ending. May it please your frigid majesty, here beside me stands the only magician in the case. The only art, the only trick or charm which was exercised by him was that sweet power we call love. When first he set eyes upon his four-footed brother, locked in the crystal cell of Schneebel's grotto, he pressed his nose again and again against its icy wall in vain attempt to know his kinsman, and turned away with a cry of sorrow, to find that his keen scent could not penetrate to him. I cannot tell you how great was his joy when I laid Fufkuja stiff and stark upon my divan, for I knew, not then, the scheme ripening in Bulger's mind. But later all was plain enough. The loving dog leaves his master's breast and carries his true and tender heart over to where Fufkuja lies, raises the pelt, crawls in beside him, and presses his warm breast firm and hard against his brother's ice-locked heart, and warms him into life again, then wakes me and tells me what he hath done. This royal Gelidus and most noble Kultiquerps is the only art that hath been used to bring Fufkuja back to life again. And to call it black is to slander the sunshine, rail at the lily, and call the sweet breath of heaven a vile and detestable thing. When I had ended my speech, I saw that Schneebel had been weeping, and that several of her tears stopped in their course down her cheeks, hung there sparkling like tiny diamonds in the soft light of the alabaster lamps, where the chill air of Gelidus' palace had turned them into ice. And therefore, when his frigid majesty said that my words had touched his heart, and bade me ask for a gift from his hand, I said, O cold king of this fair icy domain, let those tears that now hang like tiny jewels on Schneebel's cheeks be brushed into an alabaster box and given to me. I covet no other guerdon, even if I did not love thee, little baron, cried King Gelidus with an icy smile. I would be persuaded, but loving makes easy believing. Go, Frosteifies, and bid one of the princess's women brush those tiny jewels that hang on Schneebel's cheek into an alabaster cup, and bestow them upon the little baron. Scarcely had this been done when Fufkuja thrust his head out from under the pelt, and, fixing his eyes pleadingly upon me, thrust out his tongue, and opened and shut his mouth with a faint, smacking noise. Quick as a flash, it dawned upon me that these signs meant that Fufkuja was hungry. And then, as I suddenly remembered that the Kultiquerps were strictly a meat-eating people, that only meat was to be had in their chill domain, quarried almost like marble itself from nature's great refrigerators, a gasp escaped my lips, and I whispered, Oh, he must die, he must die. My words had not missed the keen ears of the Princess Schneebel. "Speak, little baron," she cried. Why must little Fuffcoojah die? What dost mean by such a saying?" What dost thou mean, probably? And when King Gelidus and Schneebel had heard my voice, my fear that he would rather die than to feed on meat, they both became very heavy-hearted. "Poor little Fuffcoojah," moaned the princess. "Can it be possible that he must be carried back so soon to his crystal cell in my grotto? Bid the master of my meat quarries approach the throne," cried King Gelidus, suddenly in a voice of icy dignity. There have been people who want to eat the ice-encased mammoths and stuff like that. "Bid the master of my meat quarries approach the throne," cried King Gelidus, suddenly in a voice of icy dignity. This important functionary soon made his appearance. Turning to me, the king bade me explain the case to him. Thus I did in a few words, when, to the great joy of all present, the master of the meat quarries spoke as follows: "Little baron, if that is the only trouble, give thyself no further uneasiness, for I shall at once send one of my men to thee with a supply of most delicious nuts." "Delicious nuts?" I repeated in a tone of amazement. "Why, yes, little baron, I have a goodly supply on hand. Know then that hardly a day goes by that my men don't come upon some fine specimen of the family of gnawers, most generally squirrels, in whose cheek pouches we invariably find from 1 to half a dozen dainty nuts stowed away. It has always been my custom to lay these aside, and so I have to inform thee that if Fuffcoojah should live to be 100 years old, I, or my successor, could guarantee to keep him supplied with food." These words lifted a terrible load off my heart, for now at least Fuffcoojah would not die of starvation. For a few days everything went well. The Koltykwerps became quite satisfied in their own minds that I had not been practicing the black art in the chilly kingdom of his frigid majesty, and each and every one of them became greatly attached to the curious little creature with the droll little face and droller manner. But it seemed as if we were no sooner out of one trouble than we were plumped into another, for now Fuffcoojah began to object to the attendant selected to look after him by King Gelidus. The man was about 10 degrees too cold-blooded for him, and ere long it was only necessary for the Koltykwerp to approach Fuff, as we called him for short, in order to throw him into convulsions of shivering and to cause him to utterly pitiable cries of discontent, which only ceased upon my appearing and comforting him by my caresses. I now set to work to devise some way to make Fuff's life more agreeable to him, for everybody seemed to hold me responsible for his well-being. 10 times a day came messengers from King Gelidus or from Princess Schneebel to ask how he was getting on, and whether we were keeping him warm enough, whether he had all he wanted to eat, whether he had pelts enough on his bed. Nor was it an unusual thing to have a score or more Koltykwerpian mothers call at my quarters during a single day with advice enough to last a month. And therefore was it that, with the view of providing him with a warmer room to sleep in, I ordered a divan fitted up for him in a smaller chamber, opening into mine, upon the walls of which I directed half a dozen of the largest lamps to be hung. The consequence was that the walls began to melt, hearing of which consternation spread throughout the icy domain of his frigid majesty, for to the mind of a Koltykwerp, heat powerful enough to melt ice was something terrible. It was like the dread of earthquake shock to us, or the fear of flood or flame. It was something that filled their hearts with such terror that in their dreams they saw the solid walls of the ice palace melt asunder and fall with a crash. They could not bear it, and so King Gelidus put forth the decree that if there were no other way to keep the Fufkuja alive, then he must die. Hearing this, an awful grief came upon poor Schneebel's heart, for she had learned to love little Fuff very dearly, and it set a knife in her breast to think of losing him. Never, never, she cried, shall I be able to set foot within my grotto if Fufkuja is put back into his crystal prison again, with his frozen smile on his face, as once used to be. And seeking out her royal father, she threw herself at his knees and spoke as follows. O heart of ice, O frigid majesty, let not thy child die of grief. There is an easy way out of all your trouble with dear little Fufkuja. Speak, beloved Schneebel, answered King Gelidus. Let me hear what it is. Why, cold heart, said the princess, the little baron hath plenty of warmth stored away in his body. He hath enough for both himself and Fufkuja into the bargain. Therefore, frigid father, command that a deep, warm hood be made into the little baron's coat, and that Fufkuja be placed therein, and be borne about by the little baron wherever he goeth. He will soon grow accustomed to the slender burden, and note it no more. It shall be as thou wishest, replied the king of the Koltykwerps, and calling his trusty counselor, Glacier Boy, he directed him to summon me at once to the throne room. When I heard this terrible order issue from the icy lips of King Gelidus, my heart sank within me, and yet I dared not disobey. I dared not murmur, for it was I who had cleft asunder the crystal prison of the little man with the frozen smile. I who had made it possible for Bulger to warm him back to life again. Oh, poor, vain, weak, foolish boy that I had been. What was to become of me now? Pjost, Doimoir is the turtle before you.